hey guys, Mark here, and Deuteronomy chapter 3 is where we are today, and we're going to meet the real OG. Oh yeah. Have you ever heard that before, that this person's a real OG? It's kind of slang for the original, you know. Well, actually, it started off by being original gangster, but here more recently, that term has just come to mean like the original, the original thing, the OG Nintendo system. You might think of that as being like the original Nintendo system, right? Well, here in Deuteronomy chapter 3, we meet a king, the king OG. Now, this doesn't mean original. Here in the Bible, it just means the king Og. But you know, it's cool. Here in Deuteronomy chapter 3, it says, "Then we turned and went up the way to Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, came out against us." Now, who's talking in Deuteronomy chapter 3? That's just Moses. Moses is talking here. And so there was a battle at Edrei. But the Lord said to me, "Do not fear him, for I have given him and all his people and his land into your hand. And you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who lived at Heshbon." So the Lord our God gave into our hand Og, also the king of Bashan, and all his people, and we struck him down until he had no survivor left. And we took all his cities at that time. There was not a city that we did not take from him. 60 cities, the whole region of Argob, the kingdom of Og, OG, in Bashan. All these were cities fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, besides very many unwalled villages. And then it jumps down here to verse 12. "When we took possession of the land at that time, I gave it to the Reubenites and the Gadites, the territory beginning at Aroer, which is on the edge of the valley of Arnon, and half the hill country of Gilead with its cities." And then he kind of lays out some more very specific instructions here before we jump down to verse 18. "And I commanded you at that time, saying, the Lord your God has given you this land to possess. All your men of valor shall cross over armed before your brothers, the people of Israel. Only your wives, your little ones, and your livestock, I know that you have much livestock, shall remain in the cities that I have given you, until the Lord gives rest to your brothers, and they also occupy the land that the Lord your God gives them, the east of Jordan." And so here we have Moses laying this all out for Joshua, but then he gets to the most important part here at verse 21. "And I commanded Joshua at that time, your eyes have seen all that the Lord your God has done to these two kings. So will the Lord do to all the kingdoms into which you are crossing. You shall not fear them, for it is the Lord your God who fights for you." You know, here in this section, Joshua learns three very, very important things. Now, as many of you know, Joshua is going to be Moses' successor. So Moses is in all likelihood preparing Joshua for the task ahead. Now, Joshua is a seasoned, educated, experienced military commander. And yet, here are the lessons that Joshua learns. He learns that he needs to trust God firstly. He needs to resolve conflict quickly. And he needs to report very specifically. And so kind of unpacking this a little bit, the very last thing is probably the most important thing. This is what Moses says to Joshua. He says, "You shall not fear them, for it is the Lord your God who fights for you." Remember that famous passage in Joshua where Joshua says, "The battle belongs to the Lord." When you are confronted with a struggle or with a conflict or with a difficult time, remember, first and foremost, the battle belongs to the Lord. God is with you, and we just need to remember that sometimes. I think, oftentimes in life, especially when life gets hard, we want to trust in ourselves, in our own strength, our own education, our own experience. It would have been easy for Joshua, and yet Moses tells him, remember that it is the Lord. And then you see here earlier on in the opening part of Deuteronomy here that they had to finish the job that God gave them. When we are confronted with a conflict, we need to resolve it quickly. I imagine it would have been easy for Joshua to have let this battle drag out, perhaps even generations. And yet, that doesn't happen here. Moses knows that when God gives him a job to do, he needs to finish the job that God gives him. This is so important that Jesus put it this way. Jesus said that if you have a problem with your brother, you're to leave your gift at the altar and go be reconciled to your brother, and then come back and get the gift, right? Jesus doesn't say, forget that gift, like it's gonna be a little while before you get to it. No, he says to do it quickly, right? Elsewhere in Elsewhere in the Bible, it says, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And so we want to be a people who resolve conflict quickly. And then the final thing he learned here in Deuteronomy chapter 3, it is to report things accurately. And so look at in verse 12, it says, when we took possession of the land, and then Moses goes with so much specificness, he lays out all of the specific territories, boundaries, all of these things that would be so important. Often, what struck me is that oftentimes, when a conflict or when something happens, it's really easy to like exaggerate things or to minimize things. I tend to minimize my sin, and I tend to exaggerate, when difficult things happen to me. And yet we can really see how that is going to affect us in the long run, right? And so the lesson here in Deuteronomy chapter 3 is report things specifically. Don't make yourself into a martyr. No, and don't make yourself a victim. And also don't, there's that balance that's there that can be really important. But remember how the Lord has been faithful and what God has done. Remember it with a level of specificness. Sometimes life is hard, really hard. And if we can put things into perspective, I think it can just be really helpful. So I hope that maybe you got something out of this as you read Deuteronomy chapter 3, that number one, you are going to trust God firstly. And then number two, you're going to go ahead and handle conflict quickly. And then number three, that you would be able to remember things, particularly in terms of God's faithfulness, very specifically. Well, hey, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.